Well, hello again, Mirador. Sorry for the hiatus of live broadcasting for the 15 minutes or so. I'm afraid I lost Keith and I still can't find him. So I took a break. But now, to cheer us all up, I have the pleasure, and it always is a pleasure, to introduce Harry Atherton live from Normandy, where he now lives, for his irreverent but very informative take on world affairs. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Philip. Good morning, everybody.
How are things in Normandy at the moment, Harry?
Well, we've had a beautiful spell of warm weather, summer
Oh,
weather.
right.
It's breaking now, so I think we'll be getting rain towards the end of the afternoon. Normandy is known for its rainfall off season. We normally have a good summer. It's not dissimilar, of course, to directly across the channel, which is where Lewis is.
Well, yeah, but the weather in Lewis, where I don't live, and the weather in West Sussex, where I do, are identical today, which is very high winds,
mm-hmm.
driving rain, of which we've had far too much, frankly, and then possibly clearing up and calming down mid to late afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Well, one imagines that the channel has some sort of effect on the weather pattern, but if winds are produced by hot air meeting cold air, and many other reasons, of course, as well, but essentially you're going to get that effect on seaside towns somewhere near the sea. And since Normandy runs along the sea on the northern coast of well, on the what would that be the northern coast of France, the effects will be very similar, I would think. But weather patterns change. I fear that we're in for probably a few days of not so good weather, but we just have been totally spoiled this past week or so. It's just been amazing. People sitting outside and on the terraces in the bars and cafes and having a wonderful time. Just it's like the height of the tourist season almost.
Yeah, sorry, you're making me very, very jealous. I suspect that those who live on the Cherbourg Peninsula, they must get it both ways because it literally sticks out into the channel, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and it does have a special climate, a benign climate, generally speaking. And when they do have storms, of course, they have big ones. But the interesting meteorological phenomenon is that just further south on the there's a lower area of Brittany which has a microclimate, and the amazing difference between its temperatures and the surrounding temperatures year round is several degrees, and sunshine levels. It is quite a remarkable little spot in Brittany, and Brittany being a very rugged country, a jagged coast, one that you would imagine would break up winds and rain and the sea, effects of the sea, nonetheless has this little enclave, which is a joy to live in southern Brittany.
Yes, I mean, it's a long time since I went to Brittany. We stayed in Carnac, where the stones are, obviously, and we toured the coastal ports. You know, is it Van or Then and other places like that. I love Brittany. I thought it was great. But then again, I'm a Francophile, big time. But that's why I'm jealous of you in the sunshine outside of Bar, Harry.
Well, the thing about France, of course, is that it's an amazing topography. It's several countries in one. Brittany and Normandy are diametrically opposed in terms of the geography of the layout of the. We're much more a much calmer countryside, whereas Brittany, particularly the coast, is very rugged. It's a harsh beauty, whereas Normandy is a gentle beauty. And of course, when you go further south, and beyond the Massif Central, this enormous central plateau, the lower half of France, which dominates the both communications and lifestyles in France, you get into a different world altogether. I
Yeah.
mean, remembering that Spain used to come as far up as Toulouse, the border with Spain used to be as high as that, and now, of course, it's the Pyrenees. So totally different, Spanish style buildings, tiles, flat roof, not flat roof, but very slow, not very steep roofs. In the north of France, you get steep roofs because of the rain and precipitation. Though the thing worth mentioning here is that traditionally the slope on a roof was determined by your social status.
Oh, right.
You were not allowed to build a house in the village or the town that had a roof with a more acute slope than the noble, the seigneur, the lord of the manor. It was quite. You got roof ideas above your station.
Well, firstly, that's typically amusing. You came up with a lovely oxymoron there, harsh beauty, which I love. I love oxymorons for some reason. I'm that sad. Yeah, I have a friend who lives on Sark. And Sark is like some throwback to the French past.
Yes.
Any law it has is all French.
Mm.
And they have a seigneur. And the seigneur still holds all the cards.
Yes, absolutely. Remember, I go back to remembering what the Dame of Sark was a lady who total power, total dictatorial powers.
Yes, I think I've heard of her.
Yeah,
I think I've heard of her. But now, Monsieur Ataton, the state of play in the Middle East. Any views?
Well, I think it's certainly worthy of debate because there is so much false news being not put about, but repeated by people who should know better. We've got the President Biden in the United States parroting all of the figures that are given to him by the Hamas terrorist organization, about the number of civilian deaths, and of course, it's whipping up a storm of antipathy towards the Israelis, who are simply trying to defend their existence. So the all of the fake news, the false news that's going around is quite amazing. And I think it's important to put these figures in perspective. All these terrible figures that we see that are issued by Hamas on civilian casualties in Gaza, for instance, would indicate that the only people being killed are women and children. And
yes, I take your point there, Harry. But would you not agree that despite that, the USA, backed to an extent by the UK, has demonstrated the sort of ironclad support that Biden vowed?
Mm-hmm. Well, the support is the support is not there at the moment. Support for well, let's look at it this way. He's doing everything he can to stop the Israelis retaliating against Iran because of this massive raid, which failed, of course, but nonetheless, it could easily have got through if Israel hadn't had such a strong defensive mechanism and was helped by Britain, amongst other people, to shoot down the Iranian drones. But he's begging for no retaliation for the simple reason that it would affect his electoral chances, re-election chances. So his interest is more focused, I think, on his own political future than it is in the interests of Israel. Now, Israel is, of course, the only ally that they have in that context in the area. And the others are all friends of convenience. And so they don't want to lose Israel. And of course, the Jewish lobby, I'm sure, in the United States is a very powerful lobby. But nonetheless, I think it's the kind of help is giving to Israel is with tying at the same time tying one hand behind their back. It's exactly the same game that he's playing with Ukraine. But we'll come to Ukraine in a minute, perhaps too. But to stick with Israel, I just wonder to what if world opinion is turning against Israel. It's because people like Biden are repeating willy-nilly, and Blinken as Secretary of State and others are repeating willy-nilly all of the figures that are being given by Hamas, ignoring the fact that, in fact, in urban warfare, particularly if, in the case of Hamas, they're using the civilian population as a means of defense to try and mingling with them to try and create a maximum level of civilian casualties. It's amazing how low the casualty ratio is between combatants and non-combatants killed. It's running at about 1 to 1 or 1 to 1.4 in warfare casualty figures. You get about 8 or 9 civilian deaths. Second World War was eight, I think, civilian deaths to every combatant, if not more. And so 1 to 1 or 1 to 1.4 is amazingly low. It shows stunning restraint on the side of the Israeli Defense Force, trying to root out Hamas. And of course, it's not helped by these totally dishonest news organizations like the BBC, showing lots of buildings being blown up and poor women and children crying in the street, when in fact those buildings, which were housing women and children, but also being defended by Hamas, like the hospitals were, have been taken at great expense in the life of Israeli soldiers. And it's only once they've been captured that they're blown up so as not to be used as further military bastions, which is a normal practice in urban warfare. But that's the only part that BBC shows. Either they're ignorant or they're absolutely ideologically biased. And you listen to their correspondence and you just wonder if any of them have ever been in the military.
Well, Jeremy Bowen is the main one.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kate Adie doesn't do it anymore, but there's Erla Gurin, I think her name is. I mean, they've certainly had plenty of experience over there. Mm-hmm. Whether they've ever served in the military, I wonder. But
well, do they understand military tactics? I mean, you take a picture for television, evening television, of a building, an apartment block being blown up. And the suggestion is, and even the voiceover sometimes suggests, that it was hit by Israeli planes or something. Totally false. These apartment blocks were blown up after they were captured. And after very strong fights, that hospital took 2.5 months to capture that hospital. How come it took 2.5 months unless it was heavily defended? Now, once they take it, well, they didn't blow it up because they needed that as a medical facility. But apartment blocks that have proved to be bunkers for Hamas, once they're captured, yes, they're blown up. But it depends on what context you show this explosion. And it's suggested that it was raided by Israeli warplanes and destroyed with all the people in it. Total nonsense, total distortion of the news. And you see it night after night on the BBC.
How are French media coping with it?
They're much more realistic. They seem to have correspondents who are familiar with urban warfare tactics. and they don't take sides. They're much less biased, which is amazing because, after all, France is very much of a left-wing country, and so you would have thought that there could be um, an anti-Semitic base to their thinking, but no, they're much more balanced in their reporting. I much prefer watching the French news than the British news. I watch them both just to get the comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Yeah, well, Israel are vowing to exact revenge and retaliate. We are told, accurately or not, that their defense staff have briefed Netanyahu with a number of options. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to work out what those options are, I have to say. Do you think that they would seriously attack Iran?
No, I don't think they will, because I think the sheer influence of the United States, they are clearly still, with the emergence of China and the rearming of Russia, there is still only one true superpower on the planet, and that is the United States. And I think the United States will not allow them to do that. They're too influential. Which I think is a big mistake, because one has it. Again, I'm thinking in military terms, not in moral terms here. But there's an amazing opportunity now to launch an attack on Iran and focus on its three major nuclear sites. The two major ones are the three altogether, from what I understand, and it would be an opportunity to take them out under the guise of a retaliatory raid. And because if not, the Iran effectively already has the bomb. It's got the refined material. It can put a bomb together in a couple of weeks and probably make it operational within a couple of years. And why wait until that happens? Because they're a bunch of ideological wizards they don't care about human life. They just care about their beliefs, and they will launch an atomic war. We have a chance to stop the Iranian nuclear program in its tracks under the guise of a retaliatory raid. So I think that a surgical strike by the Israelis on the nuclear sites would be the best, and would actually lead to relatively few civilian casualties by comparison. It's no point, you wouldn't want to attack big cities like Tehran or what have you. I think it's if the Americans don't support that, they're being very silly. They're burying their heads in the sand. But it's the same Biden, of course, who after this disastrous man Obama, that released billions of frozen Iranian funds, that many of which, of course, were then given over to Hamas and their proxies, Hezbollah and the Lebanon and the Houthis. And I mean, this was money that was frozen, and Biden freed it.
That I didn't know, I have to say. Tell me a bit more about that, Harry.
Well, there was a large proportion of Iranian assets that were placed overseas were frozen.
Yes.
And they, in order to try and keep the so-called nuclear agreement alive, whereby that the nuclear research would be, and refining of process would be limited to civilian use, which I mean, it's only an idiot would believe that. They would, if they continued to obey that principle, they would release these funds, which they promptly did. One slice of those funds released was 16 billion US dollars. That's a fair amount of, that's they're
16 billion.
Billion, just one release.
That's only one part of it.
That's just only one part of it. One release on one investment was 16 billion.
So
Well, I
your
mean,
point is that Biden effectively has rearmed all of Israel's enemies.
absolutely, absolutely. All these proxies, Iran, which was in pretty poor shape economically, still is. They're suffering from inflation and all sorts of problems. There's an enormous amount of civil unrest. The days of the Ayatollahs, thankfully, is numbered. I think the civilian population is beginning to realize they've had enough of this extreme ideology, but they're still controlled and they're still living under the dictatorial regime. But releasing all that funding to a wild card like the Ayatollahs was naive, to say the very least, on the part of Biden and company. So,
well, I mean, the figures are mind-boggling. I mean, the total must have been in many, many billions.
mm-hmm. Oh, it's not. The figure is enormous, and it was aimed at trying to resurrect the original Obama agreement, that they wouldn't develop the atomic bomb, that they would use their nuclear research for civil or peaceful purposes. Well,
Well,
I
as you
mean,
say, you have to be an idiot to accept that.
absolutely. So what we're saying is that somebody like Biden is an idiot. The United States, the most powerful nation on earth, is run by an idiot. I mean,
In that context, I have to agree with you.
it's this sort of thing is, what right have I to say that? None whatsoever, except it's
Well, apart from it being obvious.
just a simple analysis from an old man living in Normandy, that putting the pieces together. How can you rationalize why you would liberate billions of dollars to a terrorist organization, to a terrorist country, to a country that is vowed and refers to the United States itself as the great Satan?
Yes.
Would love to see the United States wiped off the face of the map. Was certainly doing everything it can to get Israel, which is an outpost of Western civilization, for want of a better word, and an alien sea in the Middle East. It just didn't. I just don't see the logic of it. No, I could be totally wrong, but it's the opinion of one man, and it's an opinion that I hold very strongly, and I express it.
Well, thankfully you do. This is what keeps you entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Iran. Okay, let's follow your train of thought. So the Israelis, backed by the US, unlikely, decide to zap the nuclear research or manufacturing plants in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Iran may well have the same sort of defenses that Israel put into place a couple of days ago, surely.
I don't think the Iron Dome, Israel's Iron Dome, is much more advanced than any aerial defense system in the world. And it's also had years and years of practice. Every day, every night, hundreds of rockets are launched on Israel from Gaza or from the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so they've had years and years of practice of perfecting the way to shoot down these rockets to get down. Interesting figure, by the way, is that the Hamas they started this war. They probably had about 10,000 significant rockets available. And I'm not talking about little artisans built rockets. I'm talking about serious missile type rockets. 10,000 of them. They've still got 6,000 of them. They're still shooting them at Israel in the evening from different locations, coming out of these tunnels that were built at the cost of billions of pounds, with money given to them by the Ayatollahs, thanks to Biden again. I mean, it's ridiculous. So anyway, here's the chance to the fomenter of trouble in the Middle East is certainly Iran. There's no question about that. And there's a chance to bring Iran to its knees and certainly curtail its nuclear ambitions by allowing a limited surgical strike retaliatory raid on their nuclear facilities. It would be logical.
Okay, well, let's carry on with that ball. We'll run with that ball.
Mm-hmm.
Big worries in Ukraine. You destroy nuclear facilities, nuclear power plants. It's a big danger. So let's assume the Iranian air defenses fail and this Israeli/US assault zaps the correct places. Is there not a nuclear disaster on the cards?
No, I don't think so. And I think what happens is here that if this was done with the tacit agreement of the Americans, not overt agreement, the Americans could neutralize quite easily electronically the Iranian air defense system, so that the delivery of the attack, which would probably be done by a mixture of air force and missiles, they'd get through okay. There'd be some casualties, there'd be some loss on the Israeli air force, but they'd get through pretty much well and okay. Most of the Arab nations have closed off the airspace to Israeli overflights, but still plenty of ways of getting to Iran. No, I think it's very feasible to happen, but it would need American jamming help. And I don't know how advanced the Israeli jamming system is at the moment, but it's probably pretty good. And I'm sure that they've war gamed, knowing that their ultimate nemesis is Iran. I'm sure that they've war gamed possible attacks, retaliatory attacks on Iran, and know quite well how they would do it. It's what the mistake would be that is if they want to punish Iran, because that is eye for an eye, sword for a sword. It's a little bit of a biblical philosophy, which I don't think gets anybody anywhere. What we don't want to. Iran is full of Iranians, and Iranians are just good people. Like most of them are good people, just like the rest of us. It's the leadership. It's the leadership that we want to destabilize and give the Iranians back their freedom. So the last thing we want to do is to punish Iranians, the civilian population. What we want to do is to limit the possibility of the Ayatollahs and the dictatorial regime from imposing their will on the surrounding area, on the world, if you will. So therefore, a surgical strike on the nuclear facilities would certainly calm them down a bit, or any major military facilities. But we don't want to attack Iran. We want surgical strikes on those parts of Iran that the Ayatollahs will use to destabilize the region. And that is...
No, I get that. I get that. I think my, as it were, terminal question was, you blast these nuclear facilities, are you not creating a nuclear disaster?
No, because these are not nuclear facilities, and it's not a nuclear plant or anything where you're going to liberate radioactivity. These are refining activities. These are the big underground factories where they're putting together the atomic bomb. Now, how cold a statement can that be? Very soon, if not already, the Iranians have the atomic bomb. They've certainly got the refined material and uranium, and they certainly have the technological know-how. It's not complicated now. You can read on the internet how to put together an atomic bomb. And so they'll have a working bomb or two or perhaps three within the next 2 to 4 weeks. And within 2 years, at the absolutely outside, and these are American intelligence estimates, they will have the means of tailoring that for delivery by high-powered rocketry. And the Iranians are very advanced on high-powered rocketry. So it's the last opportunity, really, to stop to destroy the refining capacity or the ability to put bombs together. So there shouldn't be any major fallout in terms of radioactivity. It's not like you hit a nuclear plant,
right.
which would then would be extremely dangerous for the civilian population.
So these facilities are all, as you suggest, effectively bunkers. They're deep underground.
They're underground, and so they've got to find a way. They've been built underground, so they're very difficult to get to. I think it's fairly widely known that the Israelis have a program of sabotage and have been doing it for years. They've bumped off a couple of the leading nuclear scientists in Iran. And if that sounds callous, well, we're at war. If people don't understand that in war there are casualties, and then they shouldn't be making judgments on this kind of thing. So they've got to find a way to ensure that they get down deep enough with them, and they've got that sort of artillery, I believe, not artillery, rocketry, which can penetrate deep into the earth before it even explodes.
Yes, there's a particular bomb called a
particular bomb. I think it gets down at least, I think, 60 feet or 60 meters even before it explodes. So, depending on how deep these installations are, these facilities are, they should be able to do it. But I'm pretty sure that it's technically possible. But they've got to launch the raid, and this is a God-given opportunity to do that. So
I get that.
I hope Biden doesn't understand, but that they must do it for the right reasons. They mustn't do it out of nastiness, out of just wanting to get their own back or show that they're. It's got to be surgical. It's got to minimize civilian casualties. There'll be some civilian casualties. That's war. You have civilian casualties in war, and there's no getting away from that. And particularly in Gaza, where as a tactic, Hamas uses the civilians to get them, as many of them killed as possible, as a form of influencing world opinion.
Human shields. Yeah, human shields.
Yeah.
So you're not advocating an invasion of Iran?
Oh, absolutely not.
No.
We're
not talking Iraq and a regime change.
No, we don't. The Ayatollahs are running out of time. Their own people are largely against them. The Iranians are a very much of a Western society. They're unlike other countries round about. They're on principle very well educated, a very high standard of education, and the economy is in very poor shape because they're spending the money on all of the wrong things, obviously.
Yes.
So they're ready to be toppled. So yes, we work towards regime change, but not decapitation regime change. Regime change by the people themselves rising up and freeing themselves, so that we're actually helping the Iranian people to regain their freedom.
You will remember, and even I remember, the abdication of the Shah, the deposing of the Shah.
Mm-hmm.
What was it, late 1970s?
Would be about then, yes. Mm-hmm.
And Khomeini then, and all of them since, they're still in power. Mm-hmm. It's a repressive regime. It takes real guts to fight against it, as we're finding in Russia and China. you know, as ever, I hope you're right, because I agree with so much of what you say anyway. But how can a truly repressed population, where at every level of their existence there is repression, like in Nazi Germany, like in Russia, China, Belarus, Chechnya today, how do they rise up?
Well, that's a good question. There's a tremendous reaction on the part of young women
Yes,
in Iran who don't want to be ordered the way they can dress in public. Um,
correct. Yes,
uh, and many of them have paid with their lives.
they have.
Um, and it's very sad that some of them have been beaten to death in the prisons. And the But if they're prepared to go that far, it shows that that their common will is to be free. And I think that's one of the qualities of human nature. There will be people who will rebel against this. They will not accept the dictatorship. So, no, I think there's great hope that the Iranian people themselves will resolve their problem. What we do is to give them a nudge and try to limit the power that their dictatorial regimes can exercise. And if once they get the atomic bomb, if they don't already have it, theoretically they already have it, then we can nip that in the bud at least, and bring a halt to their further terrorist and dictatorial ambitions.
Well, who knows, Harry? And I mean this very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what you've just proposed is one of the options presented to the Israeli Defense Staff.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do get in the Israeli Defense Council or the group some absolute nutcases too. You've got some of them are extremists to a degree you wouldn't believe, and they just want to bomb Tehran and kill as many people to punish
Yeah.
Well, they're wrong too, and you've got people like Gantz who are much more moderate in their approach, and I hope that that group will influence the collective decision so that it is rather than eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It's a practical demonstration which serves some purpose to pull the rug out from under the Ayatollahs. So let's hope Netanyahu is got 1 foot, if not 1.5 feet, in the camp of the extremists. Is a little bit.
No, absolutely.
He's
one of the correspondents on Mirador confirmed that he's actually deeply unpopular in his own country.
Absolutely, I think
if he weren't in power, he would be in prison.
He's a little bit too far to the right, I think.
Oh, he's absolutely
Netanyahu.
A little bit to the right. I mean,
and politics in Israel are focused on the center, almost to the center left. It's not by nature a right-wing nation.
No, it's not. This is what I've learned.
It's to be hoped that the predominant thinking in the war cabinet, or whatever they call it, is not towards just punishment and violence and use and destruction. That it has got some logic and tactical, strategic advantage to helping regime change in Iran. But again, I come back to this basic point: what an amazing opportunity, since it's Iran or the Ayatollahs in particular, who pulled the pin, that Israel retaliates in some surgical form.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioning an eye for an eye, Gandhi said, didn't he, if everybody took an eye for an eye, the world would be blind.
That's very true. Very true.
That's
So,
what he said.
so sitting here proposing a retaliatory strike, I would must sound like a warmonger.
No,
I,
no, actually, you don't.
I believe that in doing that, we avert war. If we appease and appease and appease, we've seen what in our lifetimes, or my lifetime, Chamberlain and everything, the appeasement just led to a war into which millions of people were slaughtered.
Correct.
And it shouldn't be too hard
Correct.
on shouldn't be too hard on Chamberlain, because he realized back in '36 that we have to start rearming, and so he did launch a rearmament program. He began to see the daylight, but he got sucked in Munich in '38, obviously, and came back with his piece of paper from Hitler. So it was a policy of appeasement. But then again, put yourselves in the context. First World War, the war to end all wars. We didn't want another war, so general thinking was we needed a peace dividend, rearmament, the Roaring Twenties, wonderful time. Certainly don't want another war, so we'll do everything we can to avoid one. Well, the only way you avoid war is making that you're military stronger than the person who thinks of starting one.
Well, I have a
And
pictorial book here about the First World War, because that's the war that's always interested me. At the very end of it, there is this frankly spooky cartoon that was published in 1920. You may know of it, but it's a colour cartoon, and it's of the Versailles Treaty being signed, and there's an open door where you see all the statesmen. Of course, Germany was excluded. Germany was absolutely crushed with reparations and limitations or whatever. And at the back of the door, there's a young baby in a nappy with a label, "The Child of 1940," and she's weeping. Now, you tell me, that was published in 1920. How prophetic was that?
Well, absolutely, absolutely, and what the Treaty of Versailles was an amazing piece of bad diplomacy. It's essentially driven by the French. It was of all people.
God, yeah.
Essentially, it was Clemenceau who sought the draconian war reparations from the a humiliated but not defeated Germany. The German High Command didn't feel that they'd been beaten.
No, it was an armistice.
The armistice. It was the politicians that wanted to bring an end to the war, which was probably not a bad thing. But they certainly didn't make the mistake at the end of the Second World War, when they poured money in under the Marshall Plan to help resuscitate Germany and bring it back into the mainstream of international relationships. But we wanted to punish, eye for an eye, punish Germany. And Clemenceau, the French kept an occupation army in Germany until 1923.
They did.
At one time, it reached, I think, 200,000 or more, 300,000 occupation army in Germany, which they made the Germans pay for. And they demanded 1/3 of the economic results of the Ruhr Industrial Valley to be paid in war reparations. They humiliated Germany. So naturally, when Hitler came along, and there was not just one Hitler, there were several of them, just he was the one that came out on top in the end, who just were using this as a means of bringing a resurgent Germany back into a military and formidable power. In fact, the Versailles Treaty created the conditions for the Second World War to happen. It spawned it.
Hence the cartoon.
Yeah.
If I can find it, I must scan you a copy because it's very prophetic.
Well, I'd love to see that. I haven't seen it.
Very prophetic.
Mm.
I mean, the French behaved very badly in the Rhineland and Alsace-Lorraine, which they occupied, very badly. They behaved towards the Germans not unlike the Nazis behaved towards the Jews. French troops, particularly the officers, would insist that German civilians would doff their caps, and they were not fit to walk on the pavement.
They would kick them off. They would kick them off the sidewalk.
They would kick them off the sidewalk. No, they behaved very badly, but that's because they were sick of their country suffering in the way the German aggression had caused.
Well, there's yes and no. I mean, behaviorally, the French were a disaster after in the occupation forces after World War One. But they'd fought. You know, again, we've got to temper that by saying the French had fought valiantly in the First World War, so they carried a large brunt of the pain and losses in ensuring that the Allies moved slowly towards victory. But in terms of Alsace and Lorraine were effectively part of France until the Franco-Prussian War, when they were in 1870, when when they were annexed by the newly reunified Germany, reunification of Germany, you know, when Kaiser Wilhelm I was crowned king or emperor, Kaiser of the newly united Germany, that's been put together by Bismarck. He was actually crowned, of all places, in the Palace of Versailles, because the Germans had marched into Paris, had their triumphal march through Paris, and what began as the Franco-Prussian War ended as the Franco-German War. And Germany came into being, modern Germany came into being, and the Kaiser Wilhelm I was crowned in Versailles, a great ceremony. And then they marched back and into Germany and took Alsace and Lorraine with them. So it was simply a question of recovering Alsace and Lorraine at the end of World War One.
Right.
And of course, the other difficult way to evaluate Alsace and Lorraine is that, of course, being border territory, culturally, they are split.
Oh, yes.
The Alsatians speak, most of them speak German.
Yes.
And French. It's a little bit like Quebec and Canada, you know. I mean,
yes.
There's still a cultural and mental and emotional link between Quebec, La Nouvelle France, as it was called, and the mother country, France. And this is also harnessed by skilled politicians to try and drive a wedge in the Canadian Confederation, unsuccessfely so far, thankfully. Speaking as somebody who actually holds a Canadian passport. So my adopted nation remains whole, and luckily so.
Does that mean you have dual nationality?
I do, yeah.
What, British and French? Sorry, Canadian and French,
Canadian,
or British
French,
and Canadian?
I spent most of my working life based in Canada.
Yes.
And professional life, and before I retired and got into restoring castles in France. But no, my professional life was based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and Montreal and Quebec. And
well, am I right that your times in Vancouver and BC was where you met Keith?
Indeed, it was. Yeah, we were fairly young. I think we were in our late 20s at the time when I met Keith, and we were both very keen rugby players. Um,
Yes.
um, and we founded a rugby club together in Vancouver, which is now going great guns. It celebrates its 50th anniversary
Yes, so I believe.
this year. So it's quite a beautiful story, success story. The club we founded has gone from strength to strength. So yes, that's where I met Keith, and well, we were young idealists and both trying to build our careers. He went off and became quite a star in the media world. I had been in the media world. I'd been a journalist, and then I began to specialize in the aviation world, and then
Oh, right.
yeah, and I
In
behaved
what sense? As a
well.
manufacturer
Well,
or
I no, I became. I actually was writing lots of travel material as a journalist, and eventually I was hired as a travel editor with the Canadian airline, and moved to eventually to Air Canada, where I had a senior position in communications, and then to IATA, where I became the director of public relations for the international airline industry. But again,
wow.
all in communications, and so my professional career was based at that point in Montreal and Geneva. But my hometown, if we discount Yorkshire because Yorkshire is part of my heart, but my hometown, without question, is Vancouver, Canada. That's where all my family is. My kids are all there. They're all had successful careers in British Columbia, and
Well, that's good to hear.
they're
Do, do,
moving towards retirement now. My daughter is retired. She had a senior post in a big hospital in Vancouver, and my son um, got himself a good education and became a teacher. And I think he retires from teaching next year. Now my eldest boy and the other two boys are still in harness and doing very well. So
and this is all over in Vancouver.
all over in Vancouver. So my hometown is Vancouver. In my uh, in my mind, in my heart, it's Yorkshire, but in my mind, it's Vancouver.
No, I get that.
Mm.
I get that. Well, you see, when you live a really long life like you are living,
Mm.
you have to put up with things like your children retiring, Harry.
No, but it just reminds me how old I am.
Don't. You must not dwell on that.
Mm.
Like you said to me a week ago, you know, you enjoy the fact that you wake up on a Monday morning
Mm-hmm.
and have the dubious pleasure of talking to me.
It's a great pleasure, believe you me.
Now, well, thank you for that. Um, you're as bad as Keith. You just butter people up. It saddened me to read in the British media that it is now feared that Ukraine are in the end game, that the blocking of substantial military aid by the GOP in the States, and the overwhelming, they're saying like 5-1 numerical superiority of Russians against Ukrainians, plus the shortage of armaments, that the prognosis is an offensive by Russia somewhere along the Ukraine frontier, probably near Kharkiv, but they just don't know. And that Ukraine will be unable to defend itself.
Well, you open a new can of worms here because
I was
um,
hoping so.
Biden, this useless man Biden, is. I'm not sure whether he's alive. I think he's got a motor in his been inserted, and he walks like one of these robots.
Well, it's AI for you.
And certainly his mind works that way. Um, let's take a look at. He has been, on the face of things, extremely supportive of Ukraine.
Mhm.
and he's trying to get through this $60 billion aid package, essential to get them back in the game with the chance of holding the line, as it were, which is now seriously threatened by the Russian numerical superiority and, of course, weaponry, superiority in weaponry. But let's analyze that a little bit. Has he supported Ukraine? He's just given them enough weapons, the quality of the weapons, to hold the line. He could easily have supplied them with the weapons to win back their territory. And so could other European nations. If the Germans had given the Ukrainians the Taurus missile, which can reach easily as far as the Russian border, they could have destroyed in 2 or 3 weeks almost the entire Russian military infrastructure and the captured territories, including the Crimea, just with the Taurus missile, because it has a much longer range than the missiles that they supplied. They dragged their heels on supplying the F-15s, not supplying them directly, but replacing Poland's F-15 so Poland could pass its F-15s on to the Ukraine. They've done everything they can to appear as if they're giving military support to Ukraine, but they've only given them what they need to hold the line, not to win, because they were terrified of Ukraine winning against Russia. And not that Ukraine would attack Russia, but that to hide its chagrin, Russia would then go nuclear or go more extreme and create a world war.
Yeah.
And so they didn't want Ukraine to push the Russians too hard. So they never gave them the material to win. Now, what's the situation where the $60 billion aid package is blocked to allow them not even, which prevents them from even holding the line, and now they're
Yeah.
threatened with annihilation? Well,
Yes.
that is being reported. The quality of journalism is suspect here, because that 60 billion aid package is being held up by the Republicans in
Yes.
the House, because the Republicans will not agree to it unless Biden agrees to close the Mexican border. How often do you read about that?
That's news to me.
Yeah, well, Trump was building a fence
Yes.
and try to limit this enormous influx of immigration, illegal immigration, just swarming into by the millions into, by 2040, more Spanish will be spoken than English in the United States. They're going through exactly the same thing as Britain is going through with Rwanda, and the need to stop legal immigration, never mind the illegal immigration, when this wimp, Sunak and company, these liberal Democrats masquerading as conservatives, just opening the borders to 1 million or close to 1 million legal immigrations per year, the very nature of Britain is changing. Well, the same thing is happening in the United States, and the Republicans are trying to stop it. So they've said to Biden, continue building the fence, or at very least control the flood of Latin American immigrants coming into in through Texas and Arizona and the rest of New Mexico. Limit that, and we'll pass your aid package for Ukraine. But you never read about that in the newspaper, or very
No,
rarely.
that's as ever informative to me. I didn't know that.
Is because essentially the Republicans are sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause, but they realize they have the leverage by blocking the Ukrainian aid package, because they've linked the closure of the southern border to made it a condition of tabling it. Once it's tabled in the House, it'll pass. They won't vote against it. But
No.
the leader simply refuses to table it. Uh, by that I mean, put it up for debate,
Yes.
and until they will accept that it is linked to the closure of the southern border. That's the problem there. So Republicans are demanding closure of the southern border because they're trying to protect their country from just being swamped by immigration. Exactly the same problem as we have in Britain.
Well, you mentioned the British problem, the British disease. Again, the British media are suggesting that the bill, and it seems to have gone on for nearly as long as the war in Ukraine, that the bill will pass this week with various amendments. Now,
the Rwanda bill you're talking about.
yes, I listened indirectly. My wife listens to Radio 4 all the time. And there were these two politicians on talking about this. And I tell you what, and I think you'll agree with me, if the word I, if the pronoun I didn't exist in the English language, these guys couldn't talk.
Right.
It is extraordinary. And I tell you, they couldn't agree on a thing. And it just summed up to me the polarization and the selfishness of the British political system. Anyway, enough of that. Basically, with amendments, they think it's going to go through. But what the revelations have been that, in fact, the British government has been cozying up to other nations, Botswana, Armenia, the Ivory Coast, and so on, to Costa Rica, to take these immigrants as they would go, as they would be taken by Rwanda. And so the thing continues. I've no idea whether it will pass this week. As far as I can see, the House of Lords stick their oar in every time and demand amendment after amendment. I mean, does this Rwandan thing, is there any interest in France about this?
Well, France also faces a problem of ethnic change, but there is an historical link between France and its former, I won't say colony, because Algeria was part of metropolitan France.
Yes.
Algeria was comprised of a number of departments which had equal status with the departments, that's counties, as it were, as France. And so the loss of Algeria was a loss of a part of France. And so there was already a shared ethnic identity whereby Algerians, and to a lesser degree Tunisians and Moroccans, which also was, Morocco had been under French hegemony since General Lyautey was sent in to govern Morocco to put that back in shape. And similar story with Tunisia. So many of these people from the Maghreb, from that top northern part of Africa, were actually part of the French ethnic mix. And so many of what were known as Pieds Noirs, that was the European French who had settled in Algeria, let's say, since the 1830s, going back generations. So they consider themselves very much Algerian and very much French at the same time. They came back to France, many of them, and so there was a natural ethnic evolutionary change in the makeup of the French population. That has not happened in Britain. There was an open door policy when the British Empire was discarded with undue haste when people, India, Mountbatten, the whole story had to happen. I mean, as many of these countries did deserve to be back as natural entities, and it was very wrong for Britain to hold them any longer as colonial appendages. But we had an open door policy so that people could come in, and so the actual ethnic mix of England changed dramatically, just as it's happening right now in the United States of America. It began with Florida with the Cuban exodus, and it's coming with the economic exodus from Central and South America at the moment through Texas and the former Mexican state, part of these states that were once part of Mexico until the Mexican-American War of 1836. So we're getting a change that cannot be absorbed. It's the volume, the volume of it is beyond the capacity of Britain to assimilate these people. We now have major cities where large segments of the city are governed by Sharia law, where large segments of the city who are second generation do not speak English. You've got the older generation that came here 20, 30, 40 years ago and still do not speak English.
Correct.
And so it's our capacity in Britain to absorb this influx. So therefore, the people responsible for governing Britain, and this applies above all to the Conservatives, because the mental, emotional, philosophical posture of the left is a much more benign approach to humanity. It's a much more noble philosophy, left-wing philosophy. It's not one to which I subscribe, but it is socialists. They think with the heart and not with the head.
Correct.
And in principle, whereas the Conservatives, who should be more practical people and think, in terms of you've got to generate money before you spend it, you've got to manage the household account, so you've got to do what's in the interest of the nation collectively, not in terms of individual help because somebody's down and out, and therefore these massive social programs which they expect somebody from somewhere to fund, the taxpayer, I suppose. And so the Conservatives are to blame for allowing unlimited immigration that is changing the face of Britain. And they are no longer Conservatives. And I'm talking about the Parliamentary Conservative Party, not about the Conservatives thinking in the towns and the shires and in the grassroots of the nation. So they're blamed for selling out the nation. And
well, you referred 20 minutes ago to the Liberal Democrats of the Conservative Party, that they're posing as Tories.
They're not
they're
Tories.
Actually Liberal Democrats.
They're actually Liberal Democrats. Their whole thinking, their philosophy is Liberal Democrat thinking. And there's very few Tories. I mean, the one or two Tories that there are almost lampooned now for being what they call the extreme right of the party.
William Rees-Mogg.
Rees-Mogg and people like that. Well, Rees-Mogg isn't extremely right-wing. He's just old-fashioned, conservative.
Eton educated, old school.
Yeah. So, but we got somebody like Cameron. I mean, Cameron is no more a conservative than Fly. I mean, Cameron's a Liberal Democrat. By his very nature, the way he speaks, the way he thinks, the policies he espouses. And Sunak, I'm going to sail on very thin ice here.
That's most unlike you, Harry.
Sunak is he, in his heart, is he British?
Well, the funny You bring me on to another subject. I covered in my...
Legally, he's British, and to even raise this question invites my condemnation for racism. It's got nothing to do with racism or the color of the skin or anything like this. But can somebody like Rishi Sunak thrill to the sound of Land of Hope and Glory?
No, of course, no.
Does it enter his body, his mind?
No, because he's not.
It cannot.
He's not culturally attuned to that.
It takes. How do you make a wonderful English lawn? And the answer is you smooth it all out. You lay the grass seed. You water it gently, and you leave it for 800 years. That's how you make it. That's how you make an English lawn.
Now listen.
And you don't make instant British people. Being British is and I hope other nations feel this way about themselves. I hope the Spanish feel this way about themselves.
Oh, believe me, they do.
The
Spaniards.
Countries. So I'm not saying Britain is this or anything like that. But
no.
We must have a sense of belonging to Britain through our ancestors, through our history, through everything. Our history, good and bad. We've got black stains in our history. Which nation hasn't? Most have. But we must be so intensely proud of being British. And this bunch of wankers, this Conservative Party that's in there now, and even worse, the Socialists when they get in, they're trying to take away our history. They're making us ashamed of it. We've got to pay. And this other idiot, Archbishop of Canterbury, wanting to pay reparations for something that happened 200-300 years ago. I mean, they're making us ashamed of being British, and the slightest comment of this nation will become anachronistic, and we become racist. We become all of the things that you want. Well, I'm going to go to the grave believing in English lawns,
well, so you should, even though you live in Normandy.
Yeah.
Now, Sunak.
Well, remember, Normandy was part of it.
According to the media today,
mm-hmm.
Sunak is having an Eid party at Downing Street. Eid, as you know, being the festival that ends Ramadan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have a British Prime Minister having an Eid celebration.
Mm-hmm.
Which sort of supports your argument, but it's going to be boycotted by most of the people invited because of his support for Israel, is what is being reported. So Rishi may have a fairly empty Downing Street
mm-hmm.
for his Eid celebrations.
I come back to the point, is Rishi Sunak British?
Well, I don't know what passport he holds.
Of course he is. He's got a British passport. He was born in Britain.
He's British Asian, but he's not British English, and he's not British Caucasian.
It tells he's British. I mean, but how can he think with the heart?
He can't. Look, in my life, which can't compare to the world experience that you and Keith have had. So I am a miniature by comparison with your experiences. But I have worked with, been in chambers with British people who are Asian, West Indian, you name it. Their whole cultures remain as if they were in their own country.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I remember one particular chap who's now a judge up in Leicestershire. Asian lad. Lovely family. The whole culture was Asian. We were invited to their wedding. It took place in Lincoln's Inn, all very posh, pomp and ceremony, but the whole thing was Asian.
Yeah.
And that was in the early 80s. Yeah.
And that is not necessarily a bad thing, because
No, it's not.
inculcated into this man's psyche, into his very being, were the generations of tradition and values and exposure that had made him who he is today. And part of that mix is British. There's big part of him that is British. He's made a very successful career in Britain and what have you. But the actual building blocks, the components that make him who he is, were drawn from this long line of ethnic existence.
Quite.
And now I'm going to contradict myself completely now. I'm stunned by how British values seem to drive Suella Braverman. And she's, I think, first generation or second generation British.
I think she's second generation.
Second generation British. But when I read what she writes and the positions she takes and listen to her speak, I I just see I see as being British. She seems to have shed all of the other components that made her historically who she was, or who her forebears were, and God, she sounds British and she acts British. So it's got nothing to do with the color of the skin or the ethnic or your ethnic origins, but being British is a critical element, and we're all being punished, not punished, but made to feel guilty if we think in these terms.
Well, she, and also, dare I say it, because she was the major supporter of the Rwandan policy, she could be classified as a proper Tory.
She could be classified as a Tory, and but I know I've got some very good friends. I actually have some friends who are socialists, believe it or not.
That doesn't surprise me.
And because it's because they're genuine socialists. I come from a socialist family. My whole family was socialists and union leaders and things like this, and genuine people who cared. They cared with their heart and also thought with their head. Wonderful people, and I have socialist friends who have those, who are not ideologically prisoners of the of some long outdated socialist ambition, which has been achieved and overachieved. I feel with all the taxpayers' money being given to people who don't want to work and don't want to do anything. And so these people are good friends of mine, socialists, and they think like good conservatives, even retaining their heart in the right place. And
well, so that's a lovely combination.
Yeah.
Right. Well, one final subject, because although I've enjoyed every minute of it, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes now. Trump, his trial starts today in New York on the fraud and hush money charges. The first time a former president has stood trial in a criminal case. We read, and it doesn't surprise me, it may not surprise you, the search for an impartial jury is virtually impossible. How can such a divisive man expect an impartial trial? What are your views on
that? It's funny, when you started talking about that and coming up for trial, and we've just learned of the death a couple of days ago of O.J. Simpson.
Yes.
And the famous trial there, and the difficulty they had in finding a jury to meet his case. And eventually they chose a jury, which I think was all black, except for one person. I'm not sure if I'm right there, but I think it was virtually all black, if not with slight exception. and of course they found him innocent on the criminal charges. He was later convicted on the civil charges of causing the deaths of the two people. Amazing contradiction in judicial terms, I would think. But
Absolutely.
guilty in one aspect of the same crime and not guilty
because the standards of proof are different.
Yeah, oh, I see. Well, that's your field. I'm much more skilled in that than I ever know there. But so I see a comparison there between him and Trump. Are, is the pursuit of the judicial pursuit of Trump politically motivated? I strongly suspect it is to a large degree. So there will be a tactic, I'm sure, with jury selection whereby they try and push it off as long as possible to buy the time for presidential, if he's re-elected, immunity to kick in. Well,
I think the Supreme Court's already said there's no immunity.
Oh, I see. Okay, because it's difficult to imagine him getting a fair trial, and this is not to defend Trump. I mean, Trump is completely indecipherable. Whichever way you look at Trump, you see a different facet.
Keith made this point earlier when he was available that he could support Putin on a Tuesday, and on a Wednesday he could send the nuclear missiles to Moscow. I mean, that's the problem. He's a complete maverick.
He's a complete maverick, but in international politics, that's probably what's needed.
Yes, you've argued this before. Yeah,
somebody I forget his name now. This round little object who was in charge of North Korea.
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, when Trump met him, he realized that in front of him he had somebody who was just as unpredictable as he himself is.
Exactly.
And not somebody who he could manipulate, like the Ayatollahs manipulate Biden or this useless man Obama. Great speaker, lovely looking guy, all the rest of it, personality, great guy to spend the evening with, have a beer, debate, but useless as a president. And Biden the same. They're just putty in the hands of people like the North Korean dictator. But with Trump in front of him, he had no idea if he had a nuclear bomb in his back pocket that it was going to, so he could go down. He started flexing his muscles again since Biden got back in.
That's right.
Did you notice how quiet he was after the meeting? Nothing was achieved. Nothing was achieved at the meeting between Trump and the Korean guy, except peace. Nothing happened afterwards. It's quite all the missile tests and all sorts of things came to an end. And then Biden gets back in and is shooting missiles over the top of Japan, is doing this, is parading more, is talking about invading South Korea. And so maybe there's the role that Trump played, because he is a loose cannon, because he's unpredictable, because he's all of these things. Or is he unpredictable? Is that simply the salesman in him?
Well, precisely. Ultimately, he's a businessman.
Is he not a very clever man? Not a nice man. Not a nice man. I don't like the guy. I don't like him at all. Bombastic prick of really. But is he not a very clever man? And in the big game of international politics, who is everybody afraid of at the moment? Putin.
The big bad wolf.
Putin, who's a nasty piece of work, but he knows just how to play the system.
Yeah.
And Trump's the same.
Well, Harry, I've been on air since 8 o'clock this morning. Mm-hmm. Although, as ever, I've loved our conversation. Mm-hmm. We've done an hour and 25 minutes. Mm-hmm. And no doubt, because of you, not me, we have a number of viewers, which is nice to see. But I'm going to, if you don't mind, wish you a fond farewell.
Good.
and look forward to seeing you this time next week,
With pleasure.
if that's convenient. And hopefully you'll have a less serious debate or chit chat with Keith in the week.
Well, we can talk about perhaps the Paris Olympics or something like that, where you
Yes,
have swimming races in the Seine where people will die of either Ebola or poisoned waters or whatever.
Well, no, it's the same in the Thames. The Oxbridge, the Oxford and Cambridge Cube.
Oh yes, I read about that. Yeah.
Have both complained about the level of sewage. And it's serious stuff. If you get E. coli, you're in a very bad way.
Absolutely.
How did your dental treatment go, by the way?
Oh, well, it's. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me about that because I've signed up to a king's ransom to have 5 implants.
Oh my goodness!
You know, as I approach my 90th year, to have 5 implants into my aging head, which is costing thousands and thousands. But I'm so wealthy, you know. I mean, it's
well, frankly, you must be.
I wish I was. So I'm desperately playing the lotto tickets and buying lotto tickets to see if I can pay for it. And but I'm getting 5 implants screwed into my gums, and the thought terrifies.
No, they screw it into your jaw, Harry.
Oh yes.
As long as your jaw bones are healthy, they will screw into your jaw. They'll go through your gum and into your jaw. Anyway, I'm going to sign off with the lottery joke. It's a Jewish joke, and it's Jaime, whose business is failing. He hasn't been a very devout Jew, but he decides to go back to the synagogue regularly and pray to God that he wins the lottery. And twice a week, there he is on his knees. God, God, God. You know, my life is falling apart. Please help me. Please help me. And he gets increasingly frustrated. And he gets more vituperative. God, what sort of a Jew are you? Help me, help me. And then eventually, the heavens open. And a very pissed off God says, Jaime, meet me halfway. Buy a ticket.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, excellent.
Anyway, I've made you laugh, so I'll say farewell.
Farewell. Well, goodbye to everybody, and hope I haven't offended too many people. But
see you in a week. Bye, Harry.
You take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.